And do the substitutes have an immediate impact? Because Australia are coming forward and they've made it too!
Australia might have just exposed one of the biggest illusions of World Cup 2026. Think about what happened for a second. Turkey had 57% possession, completed 646 passes, attempted 30 shots, delivered 28 crosses, won 8 corners, and spent most of the night attacking. Australia had just 30% possession and still won 2-0. A 20-year-old became the youngest Australian ever to score at a World Cup. A goalkeeper making only his 3rd international appearance produced one of the best performances of the tournament so far, and a team many expected to struggle walked away with a clean sheet against an attack featuring Arda Güler, Hakan Çalhanoğlu, Kerem Aktürkoğlu and Kenan Yıldız. But the most surprising part wasn't the result, it was how comfortable Australia looked while surviving it. Because once you look beyond the scoreline, the defensive masterclass, Tony Popovic's tactical blueprint, the rise of Nesteri Irankunda, and what this victory means for Group D, a much bigger question starts to emerge. Have we completely underestimated Australia at World Cup 2026? This is exactly why this might have been the night a genuine World Cup dark horse announced itself to the world. Australia didn't just beat Turkey, they changed the way this World Cup has to look at them. On paper, this was supposed to be Turkey's night, their first World Cup match in 24 years. Arda Güler drifting between lines, Çalhanoğlu controlling midfield, Kerem Aktürkoğlu attacking space, Kenan Yıldız waiting on the bench to tilt the game. Turkey had the names, the ball, the territory, and almost every statistical sign of control. And still, Australia won 2-0. Look at the numbers, and the scoreline almost feels impossible. Turkey finished with 57% possession, 646 completed passes, 30 shots, 28 crosses, 8 corners. They spent long periods pushing Australia backwards inside BC Place in Vancouver. They scored nothing. That's where the real story starts. Australia weren't trying to win the possession battle. They weren't trying to outpass Turkey or turn it into a technical contest. Tony Popovic's side accepted Turkey would have more of the ball, then refused to let that possession become comfort. They narrowed central spaces, dropped into a compact defensive shape, protected the penalty area, and forced Turkey into attacks that looked dangerous on volume but became less dangerous in quality. 30 shots sounds like dominance, but Turkey kept running into bodies, blocks, bad angles and pressure. Of those 28 crosses, only 3 found a teammate. That's not luck, that's box defending, spacing and discipline executed over 90 minutes. The pattern was clear early. Turkey pushed high, moved with confidence, used Güler and Çalhanoğlu to try and pull Australia out of shape. Australia stayed patient, didn't chase every pass, didn't panic when Turkey circulated. They waited for the right moment to jump, recover and release. Then the 27th minute changed everything. Paul Okan Engstler saw the space before Turkey could close it. His pass over the top was direct and purposeful, exactly what Australia needed. Nesteri Irankunda made the run, used his pace to attack the channel, cut inside Demiral and finished with the calm of a player who looked completely unbothered by the stage. At 20 years old, Irankunda became the youngest Australian ever to score at a World Cup. That goal mattered beyond the scoreboard. It gave Australia proof their plan could hurt Turkey. It forced Turkey to attack with more urgency, and it showed something Australia haven't always had at this level, a player who can turn one transition into a defining World Cup moment. His performance told you everything you needed to know. The speed was obvious, the directness was obvious, but what stood out most was the fearlessness. He didn't play like a young forward waiting for permission. He attacked defenders early, stretched the Turkish backline, and gave Australia a genuine outlet every time Turkey pushed bodies forward. That presence forced hesitation from Turkish defenders, and in a match built on fine margins, hesitation is everything. Turkey still had chances. They pushed through Güler, looked for Çalhanoğlu from range, introduced Yıldız at half-time to add more creativity, but every time they looked close, Australia found a response. Patrick Beach made the saves, Sutar and the backline threw themselves into blocks, the midfield recovered into shape, the fullbacks defended defended the far post. The teams stayed connected. Turkey's pressure was real. This wasn't fake dominance where one team passes harmlessly around halfway. They reached the final third repeatedly, forced 8 shots on target, tested Australia from central zones, wide deliveries, second balls, but Australia kept converting danger into frustration. Then came the moment that completed the story. 74th minute, after another spell of Turkish pressure, Australia struck again. Connor Metcalfe found space outside the penalty area, shifted onto his left foot and drove a low shot into the bottom corner. No elaborate passing sequence, no extended dominance, just efficiency. Turkey had spent the night building attacks. Australia needed moments. That second goal was the punishment for Turkey's wastefulness and the reward for Australia's discipline. A 1-0 win could have been framed as survival. A 2-0 win, 1 goal from a 20-year-old winger, another from midfield after absorbing sustained pressure, felt like a statement. Turkey had the possession, Australia had the clarity. Turkey had the shots, Australia had the goals. Turkey had the expectation, Australia had the execution. This wasn't a surprise result dressed up as something bigger, it was a genuine warning. Australia didn't need to look dominant to look dangerous. They needed structure, patience, and one young player fast enough and fearless enough to change the match when the moment came. Against Turkey, Iran Kunda looked exactly like that player. The rest of the tournament has been warned.
The most frightening thing about Australia's win wasn't that they scored twice, it was that Turkey kept attacking, kept arriving, kept shooting, and Australia never truly broke. Turkey completed 646 passes, attempted 30 shots, delivered 28 crosses, won 8 corners, had 16 attempts from inside the penalty area. Those numbers usually tell the story of a team that eventually finds a way through. Against Australia, they told a completely different story, a team allowed to have possession but never allowed to control the spaces that actually matter. That was Popovic's plan. Australia didn't chase Turkey around the pitch trying to win every passing exchange. They protected the middle, narrowed the gaps between midfield and defence, and forced Turkey to keep looking sideways, backwards or wide. The moment Turkey approached the final third, Australia's shape tightened. Spaces around Gula became crowded, Çalhanoğlu was forced into passes under pressure, Aktakoglu kept finding openings that closed before he could use them. When Yildiz came on at half-time to add another attacking threat, Australia adjusted without losing their shape. The crossing number tells the whole story. Turkey attempted 28 crosses and completed 3. That's not a small detail, that's the entire defensive performance explained in one statistic. Australia repeatedly forced Turkey away from central combinations and into wide deliveries, then trusted Sauter, Burgess, Chikati and the defensive line to deal with whatever arrived in the box. That's tournament defending. Not always pretty, brutally effective when every player understands where the danger is. Patrick Beach will take the headlines, and he should. This was only his 3rd international appearance. Matt Ryan left out, Beach stepping in, and Turkey having one of the more technically gifted attacks in the tournament. He made 8 saves, and more importantly, made them at the moments when Turkey were threatening to turn pressure into momentum. Gula tested him in the 26th minute. Beach responded. Bardacci struck a fierce effort after Australia and scored. Beach got across and tipped it onto the post. That save was critical. Zeki Çelik drove into the box and tried to beat him at the near post. Beach stayed big. Aktakoglu connected with a close-range volley. Beach got his body behind it. These weren't decorative saves, they were game-state saves. Each one stopped Turkey from changing the emotional rhythm of the match. But this wasn't a goalkeeper rescue mission. The defenders in front of Beach were shaping the quality of shots Turkey were taking before they even reached him, blocking lanes, protecting the 6-yard area, covering the far post, making Turkey work through bodies. Sauter, the most experienced starter, was central to all of it. His numbers won't look glamorous. 90 minutes, 17 accurate passes, 1 foul, nothing in the headline columns. But centre-back performances in matches like this aren't judged by highlights. They're judged by how often danger dies before it becomes a clean chance. At 6'6", he gave Australia a natural aerial answer to everything Turkey tried from crosses and set pieces, and in stoppage time, when Turkey was still hunting for a consolation, Sauter and the defensive line stood firm through a succession of late blocks.
The 43rd minute was the clearest example of the system working under genuine stress. Turkey won the ball and suddenly had a dangerous 5-on-3 transition. In that situation, most teams give up at minimum a clear shot. Australia didn't. Recovery runs were immediate. The back line delayed instead of diving in. Midfielders got back behind the ball. Turkey slowed for just long enough and Australia recovered the shape before the chance fully developed. That moment was huge because it showed this wasn't just a low block performance. Australia were reading danger early, defending transitions with intelligence, not desperation. The forced turnover number backs it up. Australia forced 33 turnovers to Turkey's 24, so even with less possession, Australia was still disrupting Turkey's rhythm constantly. They pressed selectively, stepped out at the right moments, and never let Turkey settle long enough to fully find their flow. That's why this can't be reduced to luck. Turkey were constantly being pushed towards lower percentage solutions, crosses that didn't connect, shots through traffic, attempts from difficult angles, rushed efforts after slow build-up. Australia weren't stopping every attack at source. They were making each attack harder by the time it arrived in the box. Popovic's fingerprints are all over this. He took charge after the Arnold era and immediately brought clearer tournament logic, structure over scrambling, discipline over possession, patience over panic. His own background matters here. He was part of Australia's 2006 World Cup squad, the team that ended a 32-year absence from the tournament and reached the round of 16. Now he's become the first person to represent Australia at a World Cup as both player and head coach. There's symbolism in that, but there's also football logic. Australia's best World Cup teams have never been built on overwhelming possession. The 2006 team had experience, physicality, and moments of quality. The 2022 team reached the round of 16 by being compact, aggressive, and hard to break. This version is trying to take those old Australian strengths and add sharper transition weapons alongside them. Against Turkey, all of it appeared in one performance. They defended wide areas without letting the crossing volume become fatal, protected central spaces without sacrificing the counter-attack, survived Güler, Çalhanoğlu, Aktürkoğlu and Yildiz without the match ever becoming emotionally unmanageable. And when the chances came at the other end, they were ruthless enough to make the defensive work count. Australia are not going to control every game at this tournament. They won't outshoot most opponents either. But World Cups aren't always won by the team that looks most comfortable on the ball. They're often shaped by teams that can live inside pressure without falling apart. Australia lived inside Turkey's pressure for 97 minutes. And the scary part wasn't the 2 goals. It was how comfortable they looked surviving everything Turkey threw at them. The thing is that Australia didn't leave Vancouver with just 3 points. They left with evidence. That's what makes this result